Hi, Gene Monterastelli here, the editor of tappingqna.com. The video that you are about to watch is a conversation that was a part of this year's 24 Hours of Tapping. The 24 Hours of Tapping is a fundraiser for the amazing work that is done by the Peaceful Heart Network. The Peaceful Heart Network has brought tapping to migrants, refugees, prisoners, and the underprivileged in over 30 countries all over the world. As you watch this video, if you learned something, if you were touched by it, if you were inspired by it, the easiest way to say thank you is to support the work of the Peaceful Heart Network. To do that, all you need to do is go to 24hoursoftapping.com/support. And as you look in the description and the first comment down below, you will see a direct link to that. I hope you enjoy this conversation. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce with you a conversation with Nancy Forrester. Nancy Forrester is a clinical psychotherapist, retired, coach, international speaker, award-winning entrepreneur, and adult educator. Her own experience of overwhelming loss 30 years ago led her into a deep study on how the stuck energy of unprocessed trauma continues to express in the biology of the nervous system today, limiting the person's capacity to lead a joyful, helpful, productive life. She is the founder and the executive director of the National Emotional Freedom Technique Institute. Using over 40 years of experience, Nancy has channeled her frustrations at the limitations and potential harm of traditional therapy, coaching, and EFT approaches into a revolutionary, integrated, holistic framework called Conscious Emotional Freedom Techniques. I would like you to welcome to the stage my friend Nancy Forrester as we have a conversation about transformation in that way. The things that I always appreciate about your work and the way you think about this, Nancy, is you're thinking not just in terms of a session or a tool or a technique, but you're thinking in terms of kind of the life, the timeline of the individual that we are working with. Because tapping is, and all of these other tools are like super, super powerful as emotional first aid in the moment. And we've had lots of conversations about that over the course of the 24 hours about how useful and how powerful that is. And that is a single application of tapping. You know, for me, one of the things that's really been changing in my mind is tapping is not an approach, tapping is a tool. Yes. Much like a knife is a tool that I can use lots of ways, I'm not approaching something with tapping, but instead I'm doing emotional first aid and I'm using tapping to do that emotional first aid. Or I'm journeying with a client for them to create transformation in their life, and tapping is one of the tools that I'm doing. And so if you could just kind of speak to how you landed in a place where you were thinking in terms of timeline and kind of the client journey and the transformational journey. I'd love to hear that just as a starting point before we kind of jump in and talk about the frameworks that you like to use in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. You're speaking my language here. This has really been my journey through life. So, I've been like 40 years in the adult education field and 30 years in the psychotherapy field and 20 years in the coaching field and 20 years in the EFT tapping field. And so my journey has been about integrating all of that in terms of what it actually means to serve another human being in their journey through life. So one of my challenges in the early days with EFT is I saw how powerful it was in the moment. I saw how it could literally create a sense of safety. And I love the whole first aid, emotional first aid approach. But I knew that there was more, that wasn't sufficient in terms of really helping people change their experience of life, change their identity, who they saw themselves to be, how they saw themselves operating in the world, and how they came to a place of internal safety and internal trust in order to be able to fully relax and express their authentic selves in this world. And so that's the journey I've been on since my life fell apart, basically 35 years ago. my little tiny life fell apart, and what I knew to do wasn't sufficient, and I needed to start on my own healing journey. So I'm so excited about sharing this with you today, Gene, because it really is almost like it's like a coming out for me, in a sense, not coming out in terms of sexual identity and preferences, but coming out and saying, hey, here's what I really know. This is how it all fits together for me. And so that's so exciting to be able to train coaches and therapists in how you hold the space for a really sustainable and significant transformation for people.
Awesome. Cool. So you ready to dive in then, and just let's kind of go through the stuff you shared with me. So let's bring some slides up here. Awesome. And just as we navigate our way through this, just tell me when you're ready to go to the next slide, because I'm the one who controls the correct clicker today.
There we go. You can be my techie person. That'd be
absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, so this is it's evolutionary in the sense that we're talking now about post-trauma growth. We're talking about building the capacity of a nervous system, and therefore we are talking about biology and how our biology has actually evolved, and what that means for us as practitioners in supporting that biology to be able to make the changes the person desires. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Where the therapy field especially has, I think, gotten a bit stuck, and no blame, no shame. I mean, the whole trauma therapy field is brand new. It's only been around for 20, 30, 40 years. But the myth, to my mind, that it is still holding is that trauma recovery means that you're actually revisiting the trauma. And what post-trauma growth would say is, no, actually the risks there are significant, and that often the person doesn't actually have any more capacity today to process that trauma-based information than they did back in the day when it happened. And so as practitioners, we really need to be assessing where the capacity of that system is in order to assess the risks of actually having that person talk about what the trauma-based experiences were for them. So then if we go... Yeah, go ahead, Jane.
And so as you say that, like one of the reasons why I'm, such a big fan of the Peaceful Heart Network and the work that they're doing is they see that so clearly. And for those of you that get the basic TTT training, you'll see that it's a wordless process, because they're like on the front lines of those traumatic things and having to retell those stories, like, and like we are like, because those of us in the Western world come from this talk therapy model, like we come from a model of where we're used to reporting the story over and over again. And what we're recognizing through this trauma-informed lens is what you're honing in on so clearly is that the system is aware of what is going on, but it might not have the capacity to re-engage with that thing. And we're doing more harm than good by having someone tell the details over and over again, because be specific. So I want to know what's going on. That isn't necessarily the entry point in some of these things. And so I love the fact that you're highlighting the history and how we've landed in this place and what we've learned now.
Right. And that's the challenge as a practitioner, because we have clients coming in who are conditioned by their society to say, that's what I'm supposed to be doing with you, and you're supposed to be listening to me, and I'm just going to tell this story one more time, and all of a sudden there's going to be some miracle happen. And we need to really understand enough about a post-trauma growth framework that we can provide the psychoeducation for that client to be able for them to make an informed decision about what they want to do. Yeah, so I threw in a slide here. Next one. This is, we all know Bessel van der Kolk, right? The goal of treatment's not so much digging up the past, but the repair of the injuries suffered as a result of the traumatizing experience, right? And if we go to the next slide, and then you go ahead too, Jane.
Yeah, no, go right ahead, because there's something I think that's really key inside of that I want to grab here in just a moment.
Yeah, beautiful. So I came up with this evolutionary biology trauma definition after studying all the therapy definitions of trauma and coaching definitions of trauma, blah, blah, blah. So here's what I'm saying. The trauma is natural, it's protective, it's unconscious, it's energetic, and it's biological. It's a response in the body to the body's neuroception meaning under the level of consciousness. So either one of two ways, there's too much information to process, so the biology is built to shut down and reduce access to that information, or, and this is the one that's so exciting to me, is that now we're recognizing it's also too little information to support the natural maturity process of that nervous system. So this is the area of emotional neglect, right? And so prevalent in our society, as our parents and their parents didn't really have the knowledge we have today about how fundamentally important the emotional nurturance piece is. And then trauma is also something which threatens their survival, not just of life, but of something which is really meaningful to that person. Right. So that then has us look at things like moral-based trauma for people serving in war and being in circumstances where they're violating some deeply held values. That explains then why that is such a troublesome place for people. And then finally, trauma results in biological changes. It's like trauma is not psychological, it's biological and it's energetic. And that's where we as energy practitioners have so much to offer this. So it results in biological changes to the nervous system that require adaptations for survival. And those adaptations limit that person's ability not just to regulate, but their capacity to hold the energy of creativity and joy and love and connection and all of those beautiful human places that really sustain a fulfilling life.
And one of the things I really like about these definitions is the fact that, and this is something I think is good and healthy, just as we have these conversations, is we're getting away from this idea of capital T trauma and little t trauma. Like that's such an unuseful approach because like what you're talking about here, like, trauma can happen from losing something that I think is really, really valuable. And really valuable is a completely relative thing. Yes. What you think is trivial, I might think is valuable and vice versa. And so the traumatic experience of it isn't the grandness of the act that is happening. There are grand, physically violent, traumatic accidents. There are being caught in, those are the things we're talking about. But if it's, I've always thought of trauma as extreme, unexpected, and isolating. All of those are relative terms. Absolutely. I can be in a room with a lot of people and I can feel completely isolated because of my interpretation, not because of my proximity. And so what this is doing is this is giving us the permission to look at it through the lens of it's the value I see in it and the safety I see inside of it. And that is the starting point. It has no idea if anybody else thinks that it's big, small, but then we start getting into this idea of simple and complex, because simple and complex is about the individual. It's not about the experience. And I think that's such a valuable lens for us to be looking through as we're just trying to be helpers in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, let's just skip the next slide, as I think a quote from another trauma person. But let's go to the next one right there. This is what you're saying to me. As practitioners, we're working with people. Yeah. We're not working with trauma. There was how there's particular moments in life which are turning points. My turning point around this was, I don't know, maybe 30 years ago. I was on track to be president of the community college system in Canada. And as part of my duties was to bring in world-renowned people to do live events and so on and so on. So I picked up this gentleman professor from the University of Austin, Texas, driving him home from the airport. He says, "Hey, Nancy, what do you teach?" And I say, I teach business, I teach finance, I teach marketing, accounting, all of those things. And he looked at me and he said, "No, you don't. You teach people using the vehicle of." And I was like, light bulb moment. And I can trace back, what I speak about today in terms of dealing with people, not dealing with trauma, goes right back to that event, right? And so, as you say, it's unique. It's like a bespoke kind of an experience to be working with a human being. Yeah.
And inside of that, the other thing is but this is one of the reasons why I personally am not the hugest fan of the personal peace procedure. For those unfamiliar with the personal peace procedure, is you write every horrible thing down in a notebook and then you just work through them one at a time. And oftentimes what that causes us to do is it causes us to gravitate towards the biggest thing. But the biggest thing in my past might not be the thing that is in the way of me today. It actually might act, like right in this moment as a human, the obstacle that I'm facing is one of the simple traumas, not one of the complex traumas. And so it's about, again, where is the human in the journey, not what is the history of the things that we need to clean up, because it makes sense. Well, I want to go after the biggest thing. Well, sometimes it doesn't matter if 150 miles down the road, the bridge is out, if there is a log across the road. The log that's across the road is the thing that is important because that's impeding and that's way smaller. And so recognizing the human, not the history inside of this, makes that transformation so much easier.
Yeah, there's a nice phrase, recognize the human, not the history. Exactly. And the other thing I think we have to remember here is that our clients come in with their goals, what's important to them. And as you're saying, our job is to find the log jam. And that logjam may not be that early history event. I'm thinking about a wonderful woman. She'd be like 75 when she first came to see me. I said to her, why are you here? And she said, with just a tiny little bit of tears, not too many, she said, I can't leave my house and I want to go to my grandson's soccer game. Mm-hmm. That was what's important to her. Well, what am I going to say to her? What's the earliest traumatic event that you can remember? No. What turned out to be the case for her was she had in the past 2 years, 8 significant losses of people close to her. And her whole system had just shut down. It just could not process all of that stuff. And so we worked very specifically, not with those traumas, but in building this post-trauma capacity of her body. And she just stayed for 4 sessions because at the end of 4 sessions, she was able to go to grandson's soccer game. There was an awful lot more she could have done, but she had no interest in that.
One of my favorite emails ever from a client was, I made 3 phone calls today.
Yeah.
And I was in tears because I recognized how much her life had changed because she had access to using the phone again.
That's right.
And it wasn't the biggest thing, and it wasn't the biggest thing in her life, but it was the biggest thing that was impacting the quality of her life today. So when we recognize that it's about improving the quality of the life today, and as we move forward, it transforms the way we think about the work that we're doing.
That is so important. And again, as energy practitioners, we are so well positioned to recognize that all of that undigested survival trauma energy from the past that the system didn't have the capacity to process back then, it is still all current today. It is showing up in the quality of the client's life today. So we have no need to go back into the past. We can work on today's experiences, bring some openness and possibility to that, help the client move into action around today's events, and that action itself will then support the increasing capacity, and the body will automatically process information from the past. We don't have to force that to happen. So here's a quick experience. My experience, I go to the movies. And it's a last minute thing I do. So I just go by myself. I just leave. I take my Nespresso travel mug, which is very dear to my heart. I fill it with my coffee and I take it into the movie theater, which where I am is a no-no. There is a rule against taking your own stuff into the movie theater. So I am breaking the rules. Okay, I watch the movie. I leave and I forget the Nespresso mug. I get home and it's like, logically, it's so simple. I will just phone the theater and I will say, would you check the lost and found? I have an espresso. I can't. The shame of having broken the rules and having left the mug, I hear all the voices from the past telling me shame, 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 shame. And so I literally needed to reach out to my colleague and do some tapping on the current event today to free that up so that I could actually then call the theater and ask the rational, logical question about, do you have the Nespresso mug? Right? So all that energy of the past is here today. So this was such a relief to me to understand that I can work within that current capacity of the client today. And I don't have to risk their decompensation. I remember years ago working with a a single mother, 3 children under the age of 7. And she came to me having worked with an energy practitioner who went to the trauma. And that single mom was like unable to function and care for those children for a significant period of time afterward. And it's like, oh, our first premise has to be do no harm. And so there was such a relief to me in understanding that didn't need to happen. So I just love this slide, this idea that we're all on the same page here. In the early days, we were, everything was so weird around EFT, and it's like we're trying to fight for credibility, and now it's all coming together. So on this slide on the left-hand side, just a very quick, this is David Hawkins' work in terms of the vibration of different emotions. Shame, of course, the heaviest, the frequency of shame being the heaviest, it's at the bottom, and then moving all the way up to the vibrant emotions, the bliss, and that compassion, understanding, and love. But now we've got Dr. Porges and his polyvagal theory, which is all making this make sense from a different perspective, right? At the bottom of that chart being the dorsal, withdrawn, the shut down, that real heaviest trauma defense reaction in the biology. And then in the middle section is the sympathetic energy, right? This anxiety and this fight and this flight kind of an energy. And then moving up at the top to the ventral vagal, the social engagement system, where human beings are, feeling optimally healthy and connected and so on. But then also looking at the chakra system and seeing how all of those different chakras and the meridians are all connected to this too. And so it gives us this possibility of talking to people in their language. Some people are very much into the chakra system. Yay. Other people are more into the more biological kind of approach, polyvagal theory. Yay. And so we're just all on this same page. And I think that's what's incredibly important to be able to be serving the world in a bigger and bigger way is not to be in fractals, but to be together as a whole. Mm-hmm. What that all tells us, this is really super important, because what it tells us is that there are only 2 basic biological impulses in the human system, also animal systems, but let's stick with humans. So that the primary goal is always going to be survival. And then the secondary goal on the next slide is always going to be growth, but survival comes before growth. And what our traditional approaches are trying to do is force the growth on systems which are still seeking survival. Mm-hmm. So, right, we get a lot of, in our EFT world, we get a lot of psychological reversal showing up as the systems are saying, stop pushing me, that's not possible for me right now. That's not really safe. And so in a transformational framework, what we're really doing is building on the wisdom of the biology and assessing its, like listening so carefully to what it's telling us and supporting it with what it needs right now. This next quote on the next slide from Anita Moorjani, is that the right one? Hang on here. Okay.
It's on the next slide. I got you here. It's right here. There you go.
Yeah, okay, great. That's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. As she says in her book, right, I'm at my most powerful when I'm working with life rather than against it.
And did you say that, like the conflict, not the conflict, the reality that I'm seeing here, like recently I did a workshop in which I took Maslow's hierarchy of needs and I laid it over the top. I laid it over the top of the physical brain. And when you lay it over the top of the physical brain and you like turn it like, so it's at 45 degrees, we have the evolutionary part up here, the expansionary part, the purpose up here, where we have the safety part back there. And, in a subconscious way, we are always going to choose the perception of short-term safety over a long-term goal. And so what you're talking about here is, so often we show up in transformation going, I want growth. And that's great because we're trying to move forward, but that's the second thing. If we haven't created a sense of safety first, then it doesn't matter how much growth mindset it has. It doesn't matter how motivated I am for change. My system is going to choose safety before it chooses growth. And if it perceives the key word there, because it's an interpretation of what's going on, if we perceive unsafety, then of course we can't grow. And so it makes perfect sense that we're like separating these two things and seeing how one stacks on the other.
That's right. And we're talking, neuroceptive safety. We're not talking about this prefrontal cortex assessment of safety. I look around the space here today. It's like, I'm safe, right? There's no threats happening to me right now. But my neuroception, right, which has filtered every single experience I've had from the past and is checking against that constantly, 4 times a second. Am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? That's where this perception of safety is going to be. And then what we're talking about here is so important because this is where the risk comes in. So if, of course, we can force change. I could force myself to go to the gym for an hour a day, 7 days a week. I've got enough willpower. I could make that happen. But at what risk? So if that is not actually feeling neuroceptively safe for me to do that, there will be parts of me which will kick up a fuss. If I continue to do that, they will kick back, they will escalate their safety strategies, and that may be very harmful to a client. Right? We loosely call that self-sabotage, but let's take that pretty seriously because that can be a lot of self-harm that clients get into, and not being able to connect it, right? It seems disjointed. It's like, well, that has nothing to do with the fact that I'm forcing myself to go to the gym every day for 7 days. So, this is really, really, I think, for us as practitioners to be taken very seriously. So what I thought I could do is just a very quick, broad brush run through what we at NeftTi do in terms of a transformational paradigm, the strategy that we use. And it really comes down to these 4, I can't even call them levels. It's not a 2-dimensional thing. It's this fluid process of connection between client and practitioner with themselves, conditioning of the field between the practitioner and the client, but starting first and foremost and always with attunement. Attunement being the actual connection to the practitioner's capacity to listen deeply and actively to what that client's nervous system is saying beyond their words, beyond their story, right? What is it that nervous system is actually telling us right in this moment in time right here? And as there is sufficient attunement, then that is actually what's going to grow this safety in a nervous system, is being held in these beautiful safe hands, a safe haven, right? This is safe for me to actually relax a little bit here and allow myself to be a little bit more vulnerable. And what will naturally happen in a nervous system is it moves into this differentiation phase. So perhaps a client comes to us and they're quite significantly dorsally dominant, meaning their nervous system is shut down, withdrawn, quite collapsed on itself. As they are attuned to and begin to trust a little bit, it will naturally start differentiating, meaning they'll be have greater clarity about what's actually happening for them in the moment. So they may have started, my question might have been, hey, how you doing in the moment? And they'd just be going like, yucky, I'm really feeling yucky, I'm really feeling bad. But as I can attune to that, then that will naturally, organically evolve to, well, actually, I'm really feeling sad. Right, so the emotions will differentiate, the cognitions will differentiate, the experiences they share, all of that will start to like break up a little bit and differentiate. And so we have to know how to hold a client in their differentiation process, be able to recognize it, be able to reflect it back to the client, seed what may be coming next, and then the next stage is going to be integration. So those separate parts that have emerged now have the potential to be able to start building relationship in a way which is going to be more harmonious, more integrated, right? And then when that happens and a practitioner can support, again, recognize, seed, predict that process, that will naturally, and that's the word I really want to emphasize, that will naturally evolve into a process of growth coming from the wisdom inside the client in terms of how they want to direct their life. So energetically, again, knowing what we know about energy and working directly with energy, we can support this natural organic process without getting in the way of it, without trying, forcing it in some direction that we think might be better suited for that client. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great.
So
the next piece of that is,
Yeah. Should be. Did my slide didn't change, Jean, did it?
Oh, you want the next slide? Got you. Sorry about that. There we go.
Yeah. Okay. So then again, a little broad brush on what we use here at the National Institute, this client capacity continuum, which we short form CCC, really looking at the transformation evolutionary process across time for clients. Starting at the left-hand side, I'm indicating the growth of what we call the window of joy. Now, the field, Dr. Dan Siegel coined that term window of tolerance many years ago. And for me, it's like, well, geez, I don't really want to grow my window of tolerance. I don't really want to be tolerating much. For me, this is really about growing my capacity to hold the energy of the social engagement. Ventral vagus was a window of joy place. So over on the left-hand side, clients come in and they have very little capacity. It is quite constrained. And in fact, what we have in that instance is a real fragmentation, disorganization of the system. We're jumping from this dorsal shutdown to the sympathetic overactivation. And there are, certain skills of how we attune to that in ways which are going to be able to help that process of moving forward. As we move into more of the middle section of this client capacity continuum, what we see is a greater continuity between these states. There's a greater, a greater flow. We see clients start talking about trusting themselves. We see clients building a sense of agency. We see clients building a sense of true authentic identity, right? Knowing their likes and their dislikes. I am somebody who likes broccoli, but I am somebody who hates cucumbers, that very simple stuff, all the way to I am someone who trusts myself to manage this world. And then moving over onto the right-hand side, this is a completely continuous flow. Of course, there are still ups and downs. That's the natural oscillation of human biology. But these ups and downs are in a flow. There's no fragmentation. In a client who's over to the right-hand side, the practitioner's basically doing nothing. The practitioner's getting out of the way. Sit back in that coaching therapy chair and just attune to the process and marvel at how the wisdom of this body actually moves these energy flows through the system. And so then we go to the next slide here. This is, I know you can't read the slide, because what I want to say here is in our EFT world, we need as practitioners to be able to match our intervention, whether it's an EFT intervention or whether it's some other intervention. We need to match that intervention to the current state and need of that nervous system. And that's where the safety is going to be, and that's where the capacity is going to grow. So, we got some great techniques in EFT, but you're just not wanting to pull a technique out of your back pocket and lay it on somebody. You're really first wanting to assess, hey, what's going on in that system? What is the intention here? What intervention is going to match that? And then stay tuned for the results. So,
and as you say that, the biggest difference in me as a practitioner in the last 5 years is the rate I go. Like I am so much slower. I actually have here on my desk a little pre-flight checklist that has 4 things that I read before I do every single one. And number 2 is ask one more question. Because it's so easy as a skilled practitioner. When I hear a client say something, my mind goes, oh, this is what's going on. This is the way I'm going to approach it. This is how we need to move forward. And recognizing that I may not be fully in tune with what they are and where their nervous system is and what is going on. And so asking 1, 2, 3 more, 4 more questions is going to give me more information about what is their capacity and what is their state and what is the most logical first step. Because the most logical first step might be doing a little tapping so you can actually take a full deep breath. before we even think about dealing with a history or getting change or anything like that. Like, I just need to get you back into your body. Let's get you back in your body. Let's get your feet back on the ground and being okay with that. Because I also know, like, as a practitioner, it's really easy to build my sense of self and my sense of esteem off of how big the transformation is of the person sitting across from me. And so there's also been, in slowing down, there's also been letting go of this sense of expectancy I have as a practitioner. Like, very early on in my career, I'd end a session, I'm like, oh, that wasn't very good. We didn't get very far. Well, it was probably a really healthy session that went at the exact right, appropriate rate for them. And so 15 years into working with clients, it's so much easier for me to sit back and trust a system like this. And I still, again, I have a pre-flight checklist that I read before every single client session, because I know I can miss exactly what you're talking about here, and I can go too fast, and I have to remind myself to slow down because I don't know what's going on inside of them.
Yeah, and in that sense, we're colluding with the conditioning of society.
Yeah.
Right. And I love what you're saying. I must say to our certification candidates, I must say at least once a month to every one of them, hey, you could stand to slow down by about 500% here.
Yeah.
And what happens in the slowdown is then our systems, once we get over that initial, oh my gosh, they're not getting results and they're, not proving that I'm really good at this and all that stuff. But what happens for us is our system then slows down. We can attune better to ourselves, attune better to the client, as you're saying, and we differentiate. We will be able to see those waves of energy coming up. We'll watch them crest, and we'll watch the energy then go down. And as practitioners, what we aren't very good at, doesn't matter whether we're EFT trained or what our training is, we're not very good at leaving enough time for the biology to come down the other side of the wave. Right?
Yeah.
And it's coming down the other side of the wave where the capacity is actually processing some information from the past. It's digesting it. So if we can slow down, if we can watch the wave, support it to come all the way down, the system will be brand new. It'll have new information. And then we can just come right back in saying, hey, what's up now around this? Yeah.
Yep. I love that.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And so finally, I just want to say, let's be wiser here. Let's evolve. Let's all evolve on purpose, because the world really needs us. And to the extent that we will do our own work and that we'll consider these transformational post-growth framework, then we'll all be on this the deck of the same ship, going in the same direction, and that would be awesome.
I love the way that our buddy Rick Wilkes frames this. He introduced me to this really awesome piece of vocabulary of being vibrational leaders. Yes. And to be in this circumstance of vibrational leadership, like, I know that if I'm in a room and something's going really sideways, like really bad, everybody's going to look to me to be the leader in that circumstance, just because dispositionally I don't overreact, I underreact, and I just kind of have a particular vibe in a moment like that. And everybody else around us recognizes that. And so, one of the, and you're going to hear over and over the course of these 24 hours with these stories, particularly with the work of the Peaceful Heart Network, how small changes in one person creates this rippling effect inside of a community. Yeah. And in some ways, I feel like I am not doing my job as a good member of my community if I'm not doing my own self-care and my own self-work. One of the ways that I am a good citizen and I'm a good community member is working to make sure that I'm doing my internal healing so that it's easier for me to be a helper. It's easier for me to be grounded. It's easier for me to be someone who help them downregulate their emotional system when I'm around, that we can then pass this along, and it creates this cascading effect.
That's right. What I know after all these years of doing this work is that the number one intervention a practitioner makes is their own being, their own capacity to be in this moment. And so a practitioner must be moving themselves along this client capacity continuum. The more to the right they move on that continuum, the more capacity they have to simply be the vehicle, right? And not be intervening in the process. And that's it's so fundamentally important to me. Actually, in our certification program, it's happening right now. Our candidates are putting in their final case study assessment. And that final case study assessment is not with a practitioner, it's with themselves.
Right.
They show their capacity to use these tools in their own growth, because that's really the most important thing. Yeah.
Awesome.
It's
Excellent.
exciting.
Well, Nancy, I always really appreciate these conversations because I think it's good for us from time to time to step up to 70,000 feet and recognize that, it's great that I'm doing stuff daily, but it's also really good for us to be able to looking in a global way to understand, like, it's awesome that we have this amazing emotional first aid tool. And as we're looking at like global transformation in our life, in that evolution that we're going through, that isn't going to happen simply from emotional first aid. Emotional first aid, like, is the perfect thing in the moment.
Yes.
And once we have a regulated nervous system, how do we then create the change that we really want in our life? And being able to look at it in this big picture way is so useful. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you, Jean. It's just always a pleasure to talk to you. Your questions and comments are just so inspiring to me. So thank you. Thank you.
If you found this interview inspiring, I would encourage you to support the Peaceful Heart Network by going to 24hoursoftapping.com/support or clicking the link in the description. And you will see on the screen right now a playlist to all of the interviews from this year's and last year's 24 Hours of Tapping. I hope you enjoyed those as well.